Welcome to part two of our episode two, Python primitives and expressions. And in particular, we're going to explore a little bit more as to about variables. So remember what we had said. What a variable is that it is a container of data with a name. And the name is used to retrieve what it contains. So what kind of information can a variable contain? Well, it can contain two kinds of values. One is what are primitive values. Primitive values are of these kinds. It's either a number, which is an integer, it's a number, which is a floating point number, it could be a Boolean, which is true or false, it could be a string. By the way, characters are called strings, and I don't want to get into the detail why it's called a string, but just take that for now, that whenever you see something within quote marks, it's a string. Numbers can also be hexadecimals. I don't want to get into that right now. You will learn about hexadecimals later when we start do coloring. But we can also do hexadecimals, okay? And hexadecimals usually are expressed like this. Now, a variable, the other thing a variable can contain is like a composition of different elements of these kinds, okay? So it could be an array. Now, what is an array and how do you recognize an array? An array, as we had mentioned before, is a box. And you recognize it by these square brackets that you see over here. And then, you put items in it, and each item is separated by a comma. You can pretty much put anything in the array with a comma, and that's what an array is, okay? And an array is extensible, and we'll see later on what kind of functions or operations you can do on arrays, okay? Now, tuple is another thing, which is a collection of things. It is very much like an array. You access it exactly like an array, but the term they use for a tuple is called, it's basically what they call an immutable array. An array is something you can extend in size. A tuple you can't extend in size. Okay, so it's an immutable array. All right. Now then there is this concept called dictionaries, which is used very widely in Python. And this is a very useful data structure to have, especially when you do hierarchical trees and things like that, because this is kind of linear. It's hard to do, nested. You can, but this is a much better structure if you have nested information. And what a dictionary is as a name would indicates, a dictionary consists of names and values associated with those names. Whatever the name of this variable is, and you give it the index x, it will fetch the value 31. And a dictionary is recognized by these curly brackets. Now, finally, you can get what is called a class instance, which will be a combination of attribute values like this and functions inside it. But we're not going to discuss classes at this time. But just remember, it can you do use it in our program. We're not going to cover this in the basic class at this time. Now, we said, how does a variable get data, right? A variable expression consists of an equal to sign, and on the left-hand side, we have a variable name, and on the right-hand side, we have an expression. And we already looked in our program, of the kinds of expressions you can put in. Now, the question is, okay, you can put data into the variable, but based on whatever is in it, how do you get it out? And how do you refer to it? Well, now there are different cases, and you use slightly different constructs how to get it out. So let's look at the different ways you get it out. Now, if the variable contains a string or a number, which means just one value, in this case, you just use a name, like we used here, first name, you just use a name. Okay. So name. So when it does this here, it's basically saying, oh, give me J, put a blank in it, and then give me sir, and then that's what it does, okay? Now, the case two is, what happens if the variable contains an array, or one of the objects we were talking about? What if it contains one of these things. Now, since this is a collection, we have to give it the item number. And item numbers have indexes, okay? So if it contains an array or a tuple, then you use its index value. So if you want to refer to the nth item, you say, and we have an array of students, we say give 0 means the first item, or x is whatever the value of x is, give me the first, second, third, whatever x represents. So you kind of use this kind of bracket. So you use the variable name, which is the container name, and because the container happens to be an array, if it is an array, you can use this kind of bracket to specify which of the items do you want. So this is how you get a specific item out of the container. Now the third case is, we said it could contain a dictionary, right? So for example, if we have, usually say we have a point and our origin is at 200, x position, xy position of 200 and 100. It's nice to use names for it. So we say, okay, so if we define origin, a dictionary like this, then to get the value in the elements inside a dictionary, what you can do is you can say, okay, the x value is origin x. So instead of giving a number, see, in an array, this value is an integer. In a dictionary, it is usually it is a string. Okay, so that's how you get the value. So that's all there is to it. Okay, about how to get values out of a variable. Now let's look a little bit about functions and operators. See, remember we used a number of arithmetic plus expressions and just values, and you can do arithmetic with it, and sometimes we'd use strings as well. So let's look at what are the basic functions and operators or verbs that we have. Now there are some primitive verbs, which we all understand, like in arithmetic we use plus, minus, multiply, divide. This is the way you use them, by the way, in programming. The slash is a divide, the star is a multiply, plus, minus, of course, are what they are. And this is the modulus operator. Remember, we use the modulus operator here, and what the modulus operator does, whatever modulus you give it, all the values, whatever the value of x is, it will convert it to divide it by 6 and get whatever the remainder is. So the number will always be something between 0 and 5. It will be one less than whatever the modulus number is. You can read it up what a modulus is later. Now we haven't used any Boolean operations. We'll use them later, and we haven't used any, because these Boolean operations and comparison operations usually are used in our conditional blocks. And since we haven't used a conditional block, or we haven't had a need to use it yet, we'll cover these later. By the way, to understand all these, you should always go to the python.org, and they have an excellent manual that you can learn what all these things are, and you can experiment with it. This is part of this. This means, now, by the way, when we use an equal to sign, remember the equal to sign, when you use it in Python, just so you don't get confused with the equal to sign used in equation, this is the equal to sign here means assign. It's an assignment. It means put this value inside the variable. That's what that equal to sign means. But if you want to compare values, is something equal to something, you have to use this double equal to sign. Okay. So if you want to say if 3 equals 2, and you want to see if it's true or false, you have to use this. Okay. Just to show you that it actually can be done, let me show you this using our Python interpreter, for example. So if we have this, let me, so if we do 3 equal, watch this. I hope you can see this. So if I do 3 equals 2, it should return me false. You see, it returns me false. Is 3 equals 3? Yes. What is true? What if I made a equals 3, and then I checked, is a equal to 2? It will give me false, and so on. So that's what an equal to sign is, okay? And the same way we can use, is a greater than 2? It's true because its value is 3. You see, that's what we do. Okay, so let's get back to our common operations for inbuilt objects like strings, arrays, and dictionaries. We're going to explore this in our next video. You will find that the operations that Python has for strings and arrays and dictionaries make it much easier to manipulate this than many other languages. I hope to show you how easy it is. We'll see you in the next video.